The average person in Argentina has seen his standard of living go downhill for 100 years. And it was the young people of Argentina especially that voted for Milei. And Milei, he's having to fight the deep state here in Argentina. And he is succeeding.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vierra, part of the outreach team of Silver Bullion here in Singapore, where we want to help you truly secure your wealth. Doug Casey joins us today. Doug is famously known as being a world-renowned speculator and author of the New York Times bestseller, Crisis Investing. And he has written other titles as well, such as Totally Incorrect and Right on the Money. And we're delighted to have Doug join us once again today. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Doug Casey. Doug, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Fine, Patrick. I'm talking to you today from Buenos Aires, where I live several months of the year, typically.
Yeah, how are things going there? I mean, the president of the country, I mean, he seems to he seems pretty strong in his message, where he doesn't necessarily like the way the world is going.
Well, the election of Javier Milei, how long ago now? 6 weeks. It's something of world historic importance. Why? Because he's the first person ever that is an anarcho-capitalist, like myself. I am too. We don't believe philosophically in the right of government to exist. We see it as a dead hand on society. Now, how could a person that says things like that and believes them and is steeped in the knowledge that Mises and Rothbard have imparted to the world, how could he possibly be elected the president of Argentina? Well, he was. And the reason was that the average person in Argentina has seen his standard of living go downhill for 100 years. And it was the young people of Argentina especially that voted for Milei. And Milei, he's having to fight the deep state here in Argentina. But basically, he wants to abolish not just a couple dozen, but hundreds of regulatory agencies and all kinds of crazy government corporations and so forth that are set up. And he is succeeding. The government is actually running a surplus, which it's better than a deficit, but he wants to get the government totally out of society, totally out of the economy to start with. So to answer the question, here in Argentina, things are getting better rapidly, although he's got his hands full fighting against all these people that have doggy bowls that the state's been filling, and he's breaking their doggy bowls.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because it doesn't seem, too long ago where excuse me, Argentina was fighting bouts with inflation, and they had to go and get some help from the IMF, and these things were just constantly moving up and down and up and down, but things are changing now.
Yes, and of course inflation is still here because the previous administration, well, he wants to abolish the central bank to start with. And the law is here now that you can use anything that you want. You don't have to use the peso, which is a ridiculous currency unit, losing value at the rate of about 200% per year. So the law here in Argentina is you can use US dollars, you can use gold, you can use Bitcoin, or if you want, you can use pesos to transact business. But he's no longer allowing the central bank to print any more money. So things are going to stabilize here in Argentina. And unless something very bad happens to Milei, I think that within the next few years, Argentina could start becoming one of the most prosperous countries in the world. You got to remember, it's the seventh largest country in the world. goes all the way from the glaciers in the south to the tropical rainforest in the north. But it's only got 45 million people. So it's got gigantic potential, which it's recapturing because it used to be 100 years ago, before socialism took over, it was one of the most prosperous countries in the world, on a par with the U.S.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and it's pretty interesting how you're saying he's really trying to get away from the central bank. And back in the U.S., we call it and the Fed. So it is possible to really move away from a central bank and use things like Bitcoin and gold and other currencies.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole idea of having a national currency, a fiat currency, I mean, it's actually destructive and ridiculous. People forget that up until 1933, gold coins were used in day-to-day commerce. And a U.S. $20 bill represented a $20 gold piece back in those days. Then Roosevelt devalued the dollar. And since then, we've had a complete fiat currency, which has lost, well, depending on the date we pick, 95%, 98% of its value.
Doug, well, I mean, I guess we're we are seeing that debasing, devaluing, inflation, all these types of things going on in the U.S. and with the U.S. dollar and the Fed. It left rates unchanged at their most recent FOMC meeting. Why do you think the Fed is not able to cut rates? And it was telling us all along that it's going to cut rates during this year, but it keeps pushing it back further and further.
Well, the problem that the U.S. has right now is that the economy is absolutely buried in debt because look, two things are going on in the U.S. Number one, the U.S. government is running annual deficits of $2 trillion, something on that order. But where does the U.S. government get $2 trillion for its deficits? They used to say, well, don't worry, we can borrow it from ourselves, but they can't sell any more T-bonds and T-bills to Americans. Then they were selling them to the Japanese and the Chinese and other foreigners, but they want to get rid of these U.S. dollars. They're viewed as hot potatoes. So the only place the U.S. government can get dollars to pay its debt is by selling its bonds to its central bank, the Fed. Then the Fed deposits in the U.S. government's accounts with commercial banks, Citibank, whatever, new Federal Reserve units to pay for the bonds that it bought from the government. So that's one thing that's driving inflation. Second thing that's driving inflation is the fact that we have a fractional reserve system in the U.S. for banks. And it's true all over the world, where if you deposit $1 in a bank, the bank can lend that dollar again and again and again. When it's lent to a businessman, because that's how banks make money, take dollars in at 3%, lend them out at 6%, take the spread. But when the dollar is reddeposited by the businessman it was lent to, then it can lend it out again and lend it out again. So that it's like an inverted pyramid, and it's very unstable. Now, look, I don't know if I've given a good explanation of how this works, but the end result is we're buried in tens of trillions of dollars of debt. And at some point, we'll find we don't owe it to ourselves. Some people are not going to be able to pay other people, and the whole inverted pyramid of debt can collapse. Now, this gets back to your question about interest rates. If they lower interest rates, it becomes easier for people to pay their debt and for things to keep going. On the other hand, if they do that, inflation, which is, say, the rise of consumer prices, goes way up. So they're in between a rock and a hard place. They can raise interest rates and slow down the rate of currency debasement, or they can lower interest rates, which rises it but fends off the danger of a credit collapse. So I don't think there's any way out for the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve at this point. We're heading for an economic catastrophe of world historic importance.
Enjoyed this interview with Doug Casey and I. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. And if you're looking for price exposure to gold, silver, and platinum while being fully backed by physical gold, silver, and platinum with some of the lowest prices around, I'd like to invite you to take a look at Silver Bullion's new product, Stargrams. Go to www.silverbullion.com.sg, go to the Precious Metals tab, and click on Stargrams. Yeah, completely agree with you there. Also, recently we saw Japan come out of negative interest rates. They raised their rates, and I think recently Taiwan has also raised their rates, both for fear of inflation. Well, what's your take on these two countries raising their rates and the Fed trying to desperately cut back on rates?
All of these central banks, because of the way they pump money into the economies and then withdraw it because they're afraid of inflation getting too high. It's like watching an elevator with a lunatic at the controls. Things are going up and down unpredictably. Japan actually is really in trouble because they've had zero interest rates, or actually negative interest rates, and that's created huge distortions in the economy. People have done things based on negative interest rates that they wouldn't have done otherwise. In other words, if interest rates are 20%, what are you going to do? Well, you're not going to borrow, and you're going to try to save. If interest rates are negative, what are you going to do? You're going to try to borrow as much as you can, and it's pointless to save because you know you're losing every year. So I don't know how things are going to work out in Japan, but it could be even worse than in the U.S.
All right, and so in all of this, we're really starting to see volatility with precious metals, gold, silver. Gold hitting all-time highs, silver now reaching about half of its all-time high. What, in your opinion, is causing this upward volatility? Is it the uncertainty? Is it the possibility of inflation coming in, or investors maybe they're not happy with the markets right now, looking for shelter?
People can sense, even if they don't understand economics, what's going on. And they realize that the dollar is a hot potato. It's the unbacked liability of a bankrupt government. And you don't want to hold dollars. So what are your alternatives? Well, you can go into the stock market and speculate there. And stock markets all over the world have been doing well, as lots of money have flown in into stock markets, because at least stocks are real assets, productive businesses. But when it comes to actually holding money, what are your alternatives? Well, they're basically gold and silver, and I've got to say Bitcoin, which is actually proving itself as being a viable money. My thought is that more and more money is going to flow both into the precious metals and into Bitcoin over the next few years. It's going to get out of fiat dollars, which are being inflated out of existence, frankly.
And so I guess we're seeing loss of confidence right now, even all the way down to just the man on the street. People are really starting to sense things are wrong. And I guess that's even why we're finding things like gold in Costco and Walmart.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. People are starting to get the idea. And Costco and Walmart, you're quite correct. And when Costco and Walmart start selling gold, it's telling you that the average guy is getting hip to what's going on. Because the average guy doesn't want to get involved in the stock market because he doesn't understand it, quite frankly. I mean, who's got the time to analyze the balance sheets and the income statements of the thousands of companies that are in the stock market. Well, most people don't want to take the time and trouble, and it's hard work. So if you produce more than you consume and save the difference, what are you going to save it in? Speculate in the stock market? No, you want to have something that's viable that you can hold in your hand. Gold and silver. I think they're going much higher. And you said, Patrick, that silver's only half of its previous all-time high, which is about $50 an ounce, which has hit a couple times in the past. But in real terms, because you can't look at the dollar, it's a floating abstraction. Silver's only a quarter, a fifth of its previous high. So it's got a lot of upside potential. And the same is true of gold. In real terms, the previous high of gold was actually at $850 an ounce back in 1980. But $850 an ounce in 1980 is like $3,000 an ounce today. And the world financial situation is much more dangerous than it was even back in 1980. So that, yeah, it's going to go to 3,000 and beyond on this run, I think.
Yeah, it's a dangerous financial situation. I mean, we're continuing to see central banks buying gold, and I've heard people say part of the reason, among other things, that these central banks are buying gold, they, as much as they may not love the dollar, they have an even harder time trusting themselves. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. This is one of the wonderful things, incidentally, about Bitcoin coming onto the scene because those of us who are fans of gold and silver always used to call the dollar a fiat currency, paper currency, fiat currency. But nobody really took that seriously because it's all there was. But when Bitcoin came around, the Bitcoiners recognized it and started calling the dollar a fiat currency too. And I think what's going to happen is that there shouldn't be any antagonism between gold guys and Bitcoin guys because you need both in your portfolio. And a lot of Bitcoin guys are starting to understand gold, and they didn't understand it before. It's an alternative to the fiat dollar or the fiat pound or the fiat euro or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with you there also. Where I think it's good to have both. I think it's good to understand both. Um, but I think with gold and silver, guys, and I'll speak for myself. One of the hardest things about accepting Bitcoin is seeing how Bitcoin has advanced so quickly more than gold and silver. So I know for me it's a there's a little sting to it, but I do understand that Bitcoin is something that we all should be taking a look at as well.
Yeah, the thing with Bitcoin is that it's the big thing with Bitcoin is that it's very private. Of course, gold can be very private also. But the nice thing about Bitcoin is that it allows you to transfer your wealth any place in the world instantly and cheaply. And that's the only disadvantage with gold. It's that the gold that you have in the US, Singapore, it doesn't matter where you have it, there it is. And you can't move it quickly and easily, really. Not like not like Bitcoin.
Yeah, one more Bitcoin question here. When it first came out, or I should say, when did you actually pull the trigger to be convinced that Bitcoin really is an alternative currency and something that you should have in your portfolio?
Well, I was a late adopter to Bitcoin. I only got into it in 2017. And why had I not jumped into the Bitcoin market before then? Well, I looked at the five characteristics of a good money, which Aristotle laid out in the fourth century BC. And what are those five things that you need for a good money? It has to be durable. That's why you can't use wheat as money. it has to be divisible. That's why you can't use artwork as money. You can't make change for the Mona Lisa. It has to be convenient. That's why you don't use lead as money. It just takes too much to be of value. It has to be consistent. That's why you can't use real estate as money. Every piece is different from every other piece. So Bitcoin suited all of those parameters for a good money, as does gold and silver for that matter. But the fifth one was it has to have use value in and of itself. And I couldn't figure, well, look, Bitcoin is just a digital abstract. It's a mathematical abstract. What's the use of Bitcoin? And then it occurred to me, wait a minute, it's the perfect transfer mechanism. It's all of those other four things that I just mentioned. But it can be transferred instantly. It's in today's computer-driven and electronic world, it's a good complement to gold, and you really should have both.
Yeah, yeah, those are some great words there. With the getting back to the US dollar, do you think de-dollarization is an unstoppable trend? I mean, it's not just countries de-dollarizing. It's also you and I moving into things like gold or Bitcoin and things like that. But do you think the world or at least a great part of the global economy made up its mind to move off of the US dollar and it's an unstoppable trend?
No question about that, Patrick, because everybody in the world basically uses dollars at this point. When when the Pakistanis trade with the Japanese, what do they use? They don't use either of their currencies. They use dollars. And dollars are the major export of the U.S. People think the U.S. exports Boeings and wheat. Well, yeah, it does. But the major export of the U.S. is dollars. We ship them abroad, and those nice foreigners send us Toyotas and Mercedes and cocaine and God knows what for the dollars that we ship abroad. But that means that there are trillions and trillions of dollars outside the U.S., and those dollars are an IOU nothing. At some point, if somebody decides, if a panic hits, that they don't want dollars, all you can do is take those dollars back to the U.S., and trillions of dollars that are abroad flow back into the U.S., domestic prices in the U.S. explode, and the amount of real wealth in the U.S. will be purchased by the foreigners that own those dollars now. So the standard of living of the average American could collapse very quickly. So the reason that the Russians and the Chinese and all the BRICS actually want to get out of the dollar is because they don't want to get stuck holding the bag. The question is, what are they going to use instead of the dollar? Nobody trusts the ruble. Nobody trusts the yuan. So I think they're going to go back to gold, actually using gold the way the world used before the last depression from 1929 to 1946.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and it seems like the U.S. and Argentina, they're kind of at crossroads there, where the U.S. is going down to where Argentina was, and the U.S. Argentina is starting to get up to places that the U.S. once was.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good observation. It seems like the U.S. is like 20 years behind Argentina. The standard of living has been going down and down and down gradually in the U.S., as it did in Argentina for over 75 years. Now Argentina hopefully has turned the corner and is coming back up, but I'm afraid that the U.S. is still on a serious downward slope. I mean, it's still getting involved in wars all over the world. I mean, primarily in the Ukraine, But this thing between Israel and Gaza, I mean, the U.S. has a hand in that too. Not very helpful. Um, yeah, it's very sad because from its founding, the U.S. was an exceptional country. It was the only country ever founded that was based upon the values of individual liberty and personal freedom and free speech. It was founded on those values. It's unique that way. But it's throwing all those good things out the window, and it's turning into just another welfare warfare state, over indebted, on its way to collapse. It's really very sad. So I actually feel my standard of living is much higher here in Argentina for lots of reasons we could talk about. And I'm actually a little bit afraid being in the U.S. because they're passing all these laws now about, you say something that offends somebody and you can be prosecuted. And when you look at what the U.S. is doing to Donald Trump, now whether you're a fan of Trump or not makes no difference. The point is that, prosecutors have accused him of things and judges of a $500 million fine. I mean, this is insane. It's actually criminal what they're doing to him. It's the rule of law is a dead duck in the U.S.
Yeah, I've often heard that one of the last bastions of a country is their judiciary system, and once that goes, the country's basically gone.
Yeah, and I think it is gone in the U.S. because the leftists, well, people like Soros, have spent a lot of time and money getting hardcore leftists as judges and prosecutors and well, look at the Supreme Court. That stupid woman, Ketanji Jackson, who couldn't even say what a woman was. I mean, and she did something even more stupid just the other day. She said that you don't want the First Amendment because it ties the hands of the U.S. government too much. Well, what an idiot. That's why we have the First Amendment and all the other amendments to tie the hands of the U.S. government. So, these people are everywhere. It's like an infestation of roaches or bed bugs, and I don't know how you get rid of them. It's going to take a long time. I think things are going to get worse in the U.S. before they get better, quite frankly, Patrick.
Yeah, I completely agree also with that. It's I think it's hard for them to stop wherever it's going to, but and part of that I think when other nations they see this and as you mentioned before they no longer want to take on US debt, they no longer necessarily want to buy US treasuries and the only guy buying it is Jerome Powell and company and buying treasuries and then putting digits back in the government's account. How long more can this game possibly last?
Well, I think we're approaching a crisis now, quite frankly. Um, a financial crisis, an economic crisis, absolutely a political crisis, because in the U.S., the red state people and the blue state people really hate each other. They can't even carry on a conversation with each other. They can't have a Thanksgiving dinner together. It's really, I've never seen anything like this. I was around during the 60s when it was getting pretty much out of control. But this is much worse than what it was in the 60s. So uh, where's it going to end? Um, I guess we're going to have an election in November, but it doesn't matter who wins, Trump or the Democrats. I don't think they're going to run Biden. They got to replace him with somebody. He's just too decrepit, too senile, too far gone. He's an embarrassment. So Trump and whoever the Democrats put up, I guess we'll still have an election. But it doesn't matter who wins. The side that loses is going to be really, really angry. And I don't know what that's going to lead to. Eventually, the breakup of the U.S.
Breakup of the US. I it's hard to not necessarily hard to comprehend, but I think it's something that almost all of us don't really want to look at, or don't really want to see. Um, any anything positive out there that that we can look forward to?
Yeah, yeah, two things. One, the average person is like genetically programmed to produce more than he consumes and save the difference. We're kind of all like squirrels that way. So that's good. Capital keeps getting built. Of course, on the other hand, people, when they save their excess production, they do it in fiat currency and it can get destroyed. Anyway, that's a different subject. And the second good thing is that technology keeps advancing at the rate of Moore's Law now. And that's the mainstream of human progress. I just hope that most of that technology isn't used for World War III, and I hope World War III doesn't actually destroy the world. But those are the two things that I'm optimistic about.
Okay, and but with that technology, of course, we're looking at things like CBDCs. We're looking at things like artificial intelligence. I mean, with just those two things alone, come 5, 10 years from now, how do you see mankind evolving to where they have to cope with CBDCs, or artificial intelligence, that I call artificial influence?
Well, nothing wrong with artificial intelligence. I mean, it could take the computer revolution to the next level. The bad news about it is that the bad guys have control of it. It's just like the invention of gunpowder. The bad guys used it to start with to keep the peasants under further control. But eventually the cat got out of the bag and the peasants used it to shoot armored knights and knock down castles on the hill. Same thing with artificial intelligence. Eventually it'll democratize, if you will. So, and CBDCs are a catastrophe, a disaster, where everybody's fiat currency will be held and controlled centrally by the central banks. So this is all the more reason to own a lot of physical gold and silver, preferably in the form of small coins. You don't want to use CBDCs. They're going to arrive. They'll be everywhere, but you want to avoid them wherever possible. And put your savings in gold and silver and Bitcoin.
All right. So, like I like to say, none of this is financial advice. It's just Uncle Doug advice. So, giving us some of the good things we need to know.
I, I'm just telling people. I'm just telling people what I'm doing, Patrick, and they can do it or not do it.
All right, Doug Casey. Before we head out, can you tell us how we can follow more of your views, and maybe about what you've been up to lately?
Well, I have at internationalman.com. Uh, I do a weekly article, and there are great articles by really great writers every day on these things. So, and it's free, so everybody should go to internationalman.com and open up an account. And also, I have a podcast site called on YouTube called Doug Casey's Take. So we talk about all kinds of things. So those two things. And last, if you go on Amazon, I have a number of books, but a series of novels that I'm writing. Speculator is the first one. Drug Lords the second one. Assassins the third one. They're rather radical novels, and I think you'll find them enjoyable reading.
Yeah, yes, yes, yes. So Amazon has been treating you nice. They still keeping your books out for all of us to be able to find and see.
Absolutely, Amazon goes everywhere. So, yeah, yeah, they're very good books, tracing the history of our hero Charles Knight as he advances through more and more radical things in his life. Next one will be called Next one will be called Terrorist. He's not a terrorist. I've got a lot of views on terrorism, but that's the title of the next book, which will be out sometime, hopefully.
Look forward to it. All right, Doug Casey, I'd like to thank you once again for your time. Hope things in Argentina continue to improve, and you look like a happy, very well guy there.
Thanks, Patrick.
That was Doug Casey sharing his views on the economy and precious metals. To follow more of Doug's views, follow him on Twitter at RealDougCasey. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and give us a thumbs up. All are greatly appreciated. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.